democracy is threatened from outside, but is also failing to perform from within. We've created slow, overburdening bureaucracies that undermine the performance, and the people are beginning to lose trust in the system if it doesn't deliver for them. And we observe that. We've also been lying to ourselves that the kind of welfare that we can give to the people as the nation state is something that can last forever, and that we can always add a bit on top, and that we can strengthen the state and its legitimacy by constantly giving more handouts and providing more social welfare and so on. And it's part of the crisis of democracy as well. If people get used to the state always taking care of you, it's very easy to get into a legitimacy crisis when you can't take care of everyone anymore. So we need to understand that in Germany, in Europe, we have failed to use the peace dividend well. We have failed to use the times of peace and prosperity to prepare for tougher times. Now we are heading into tougher times, and we are at a decisive moment right now. I'm not too pessimistic, because if we are honest to ourselves, we can pull the right strings, we can make the right decisions, we can come out of this crisis stronger than before. Not with that old idea of the West, but maybe with a strong, united Europe with strong partners in the world. Business as usual is over, crisis is the new normal, and the old order will not survive in its current form. And this is where I think it becomes very interesting for Kenya to come in. Because one is, Kenya has shown its commitment to multilateralism and to strengthening and sustaining a rules-based international order, but at the same time, Kenya has been a very strong voice on the need to reform the international order. So this, I think, is an opportunity that we are looking at. In very concrete terms, from the German perspective, what is happening now and what will need to happen under the new incoming government is, one, a massive need for reforms, an actual transformation of our bureaucracy, our welfare, our infrastructure. We need to address the rise of populism, the crisis of democracy. We need to face the demographic challenge. The demographic development in Germany and Europe is quite a contrast to what is happening in Kenya. And we need to gain back our defense capacities. The question of European strength and unity and the future role in the world is one that concerns us a lot. If Europe right now doesn't take the right lessons, doesn't stand together and doesn't stand strong, we will not be a big player in the new international order. And it might not be the kind of order that we would want to see. That also means we will need to seek future alliances, stronger alliances for strategic cooperation and for the protection, but also reform of the rules-based international order. Otherwise, we may be heading into a new era of a new international order that is primarily based on the bully principle. The big players will have their way. They will distribute and demarcate their spheres of influence. The Americans on the one hand, the Chinese on the other hand, maybe the Russians. The Russians thriving for dominance, even within Europe, taking control of Western Europe. Interestingly, there's a big question mark when it comes to Africa, because it's not so clear who the bully will be on the continent here. I don't know whether that's good or bad news. History would show us it's bad news. Because if the big players use Africa as their battleground, it's the African countries that will suffer the most. And we've seen that in the history as well, in colonialism, in the Cold War era. We'll have a new government in Germany, and I'm eagerly looking forward to that, because the chairman of my party is hopefully going to be the next chancellor of Germany, and he's going to be a good chancellor, and we will hopefully address these challenges in the right way. But it's also not something we can take for granted. You'll follow the news in the coming weeks. It's a bit quiet right now, but it's not a done deal. So we have tricky a tricky situation in Parliament with the extremists on the left and right having gained votes, and it's very complicated for us to form a government because we will be leading that government and everybody is expecting for us to turn things around and push for fundamental change within Germany, but we have to form a coalition with the party that was leading the previous government. So managing that transition with the previous leaders, with the Social Democratic Party, that, in my view, is not yet responding honestly to the kind of questions I raised. So we will have to see heading there, but we still have a few days, a few weeks, and I hope the outcome is going to be good. What comes out from the coalition talks so far, and I just want to highlight maybe what is relevant from the Kenyan perspective, are just a handful of things. One is a very clear priority for security and defense. So one thing that the incoming government already did in the outgoing parliament is to have a constitutional change that allows us to go beyond the debt ceilings, beyond the limitations, so that in theory we can have endless spending on defense. That's quite a remarkable step for Germany. And that means we are waking up. You don't achieve peace by making yourself weak. Another one is that we will be looking into diversifying trade and supply chains. That was already the case 2 weeks ago, but I think the determination will even be stronger looking at the news of what happened 2 days ago and what Trump announced in the US. A third one, focus on investment rather than aid. Germany will be committed to development cooperation, but the incoming German government will change the modalities of development cooperation. I think that comes with opportunities for Kenya. And also, we will be seeking stronger alliances with non-traditional, but somehow still like-minded partners. And I put Kenya in that category, and I know the German embassy does, and I know the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Germany does. So what I hope to see from the incoming German government when it comes to international cooperation is a more strategic, a more interest-based, and yes, also a more transactional approach to international partnerships. And that's an immense opportunity for Kenya. But if we now look at the Kenyan angle, and you will know much better than me, that's why I'll just tickle you a bit. But the Kenyan perspective on what is happening in the world, yes, it will come with immense challenges. That global economic recession that we'll be heading into now is going to hit you hard. The tariffs are going to hit you hard, and the possible domino effect of that will hit you hard. And we all know that what the markets and investors hate the most is uncertainty. And as long as we have that president in the US, and the US continuing to play a dominant role, we will have uncertainty. I think the one thing that is certain with Trump is uncertainty. Aid funding is going down. We've all talked about the impact of US aid being stopped and pulling out, and the implications for employment in Kenya and so on. And there is more push in that direction. We know where the UK is heading with development cooperation. We've heard the announcements in the Netherlands. Germany will stay committed to development cooperation, but the modalities will change. But it might be an opportunity in the long run, but in the short term, it's going to hurt. And if we are very pessimistic, we might even have a crisis of the UN system. If countries invest more in their national defense and decide to invest less in multilateral institutions, because the idea of multilateralism is even being discredited left, right, and center, UN agencies will struggle. I don't have to tell you what it would mean for Kenya if the agencies that are based here in Nairobi have to significantly reduce their spending and let go of thousands of staff. But it's a scenario that we have to be aware of. And also we are aware of the instability here in the region. And that instability will be hard to contain, and it might become harder to contain. because the global economic situation and the challenges arising from that might further fuel conflicts and might lead to more instability, and international partners being busy with enhancing their own defense capacities and dealing with their own crisis in their immediate neighborhoods might mean that you'll have a harder time getting support for the stabilizing force that Kenya is here in the region. And clearly put, Kenya itself has the same challenge. You cannot have prosperity without stability. You cannot have stability without prosperity. And addressing both at the same time, addressing the economic challenges, addressing the challenges of the young population, and maintaining stability and making sure that the grievances are out there don't translate into riotism or violence, I think is an immense challenge. But I want to close by talking about the opportunities. So I mentioned development cooperation a few times now. Those changing modalities will be better for countries like Kenya in the long run. In fact, we have been lobbying for that. Before I came to Kenya, I was based in Berlin for 4 years. We worked with the CDU party very closely when they were in opposition. Now they will be back in government. But obviously, when your party is in opposition, that's the time you use for groundwork to make the politicians understand how things need to be done differently. When they don't rely on the ministerial bureaucracies and all the experts in government, they'll come looking for your advice in your political foundation. That's what we've been doing, and we've been lobbying for that. I don't even have a problem with Germany not having a Ministry for Development Cooperation anymore. We can do it under Foreign Affairs. If it saves us money on the bureaucracy, fine. The commitment to development cooperation and maybe even enhanced spending on development cooperation needs to be there, but not with the logic of aid. Not with a donor-recipient relationship, but with partners in business, with partners in security, with partners who sit together, agree on where you can work together on clearly spelled out interests, and work on a win-win situation. So, and Kenya is ready for that. I think there are very few developing countries, if we even want to use that term, who are as ready for that as Kenya. With the logic of interest-based cooperation, with the logic of investment for prosperity. I also do think, and I got a bit encouraged, we had our Ministry of Defense with a large delegation here this week. I also had a dinner with a delegation, and there is very, very strong interest in reorienting also Germany's security engagement in different regions in the world. And East Africa and the Horn of Africa is one area where they are aware that engagement needs to be stronger. And the PCS, we talked about it the other week. We will continue lobbying for that. The ministry indicated that their doors are open. We will continue lobbying for more German and European support for dealing with the crisis here in the region, and we know who has the lead role to play. Kenya is the anchor for stability in the region here. So I think that is an immense opportunity. The fact that Kenya has established itself as a strong voice for multilateralism. The commitment is strong, and it's not just the rhetorics of your president, it's also shown in action. You can take the Haiti mission and many other examples where Kenya has shown, or take it when it comes to climate diplomacy, but Kenya has not just shown its commitment to seeking multilateral solutions by rhetorics, but actually by action. And as the world changes and we're looking at a reshaping international order, let's take up that opportunity. And the architects of the new international order will not just sit in Washington, Berlin, Paris, whatever. That's going to be, and it has to be, an inclusive international engagement. And I think Kenya on the African continent will play a lead role when it comes to that. Kenya has also been very progressive on the trade aspect. I mean, just take the example of the EPA and how Kenya is bolder and moving faster than other countries in the region, and that will be the way to go. As the US decide to pull out, I mean, Donald Trump basically announced that the US doesn't want globalization anymore. That is it. You close your borders, you produce everything at home, and you're on your own, you can take care of yourself. That's the long-term vision they have. The rest of the world doesn't have that. China doesn't have that vision, Europe doesn't have that vision, Kenya doesn't have that vision. So what are we going to make? How do we turn that crisis into an opportunity for creating more investment connections, for having more free trade for the sake of prosperity? Lastly, you have a very young, well-educated, resilient population, far more resilient than the German population. In Germany now we have young people entering talk shows left, right and center talking about how they would rather surrender to the Russians now than ever picking up a gun to fight. Ask Kenyans the same and the answer will be fundamentally different. That's a big plus. And in fact, you still have young people. We don't have many young people in Germany anyway. We're an aging society. Rosalind, you're laughing. We will turn that into an opportunity as well. So here's an example. Tomorrow I'll be on a plane with a delegation from East Africa, including colleagues from the diaspora docket, and we will talk about labor migration and the opportunities there. And we know that the incoming government will be as committed to pursuing that as the current government. So these are a few things I just wanted to throw at you. And I hope it can tickle your brain a bit. One thing that we need is honesty. I can be more honest than our ambassador because I'm not a diplomat. But you need, and that's just my appeal, push the Germans, push the Europeans, force them to be honest, to sit down and have an eye-to-eye dialogue. The ball is in your court. The Germans, the Europeans are the ones who need to panic a lot more about the current situation than you do. The opportunities are on your side. So as you sit at the table, articulate your interests clearly, but force the German side to also spell it out very clearly what is your interest, what's in it for us, what's in it for you. Let's not beat around the bush. Nobody's doing anything out of altruism, so let's identify where can our interests come together, where can we achieve something together. Ultimately, we do all that based on an understanding that we share values. And not because we've been traveling around preaching about how we do things back at home, but a shared understanding of how an international order needs to look like, where countries like Kenya and Germany can thrive. And we want stability. And sorry, now I'm going to do something, also because I'm not a diplomat, I'll leave you with one warning. There are players out there that share an interest in stability. There are players out there that do the opposite, that thrive on instability. I am not so sure about the US under Trump, but we can't rule out that part of their agenda is to trigger more instability for their own advantage. The Europeans struggle with the competition from China. And we have a very tricky attitude and a very tricky relationship. Now we might be forced to move closer to China again because of Trump. But there's one thing in common we have with the Chinese, that's the interest in stability. China is interested in stability in partnering countries where you can invest, where you can trade. I mentioned the three potential bullies out there. Russia is another one. I have question marks about Trump and the US. I am pretty sure about the Chinese and their interest in stability. I'm pretty sure about the Russians and their interest in instability. Make no mistake, Russia thrives on instability. Russia doesn't have the economic power to be an attractive partner and to come in with massive investment. Where Russia can play a role is where there's instability. because what they do have is mercenary, is weapons, is military force, and not caring so much about people suffering. I'm sorry to say that. You can beat me for that and say, well, you are the biased German, you just have an issue with Russia that we don't have, but I wanted to throw that out here, because my role today, this morning, I understood it to be one of just provoking you a bit and tickling your minds a bit. I hope that I did that successfully. Thank you for having me. I hope I didn't speak way too long, but I wish you all very, very fruitful deliberations. We are extremely happy to be partnering with you, but also, as I said, this is your process. We are not going to meddle in those affairs, so don't be surprised if I'm out of here pretty soon after the formal opening. Thank you so much.
Let's put our hands together again for Matthias. Come. I think you haven't really tickled our minds. I think you have a bit shocked it. And those of us who are not awake this morning, I think, are wide awake, given the rather sobering view, of the international environment that we live within. And so we want to thank you very much. Thank you for your candor. Thank you as well for your advice. I would love to continue this conversation with you bilaterally, but again, thank you. Your Excellency, it's my pleasure now to welcome my sister, Dr. Aurelia Rono, just to make a few observations. I was generous with Matthias in terms of the length of time we allowed him to speak, and I think it has been quite an edifying session, but with regard to the rest of us, I'll be a bit tight. So you have 5 minutes max. Thank you.
Thank you, Piers. Your Excellency, the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, the Chairperson, Departmental Committee on Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations, the Honorable Vice Chairperson, the Honorable members of the committee, my colleague PS, Dr. Singoe, PS Roslin, representative from the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, parliamentary staff who are present here today, invited guests and speakers. Good morning. Yeah, it gives me great pleasure to join you today during this important and timely retreat to deliberate on this critical legal instrument that is the Kenya Foreign Policy 2024. Honorable Chairperson, let me begin by expressing my deep gratitude to you and your committee and the entire House of Legislation at large for the exemplary support you've continued to offer our State Department for Parliamentary Affairs and consequently the entire executive arm of government. Your Excellency, honorable members, allow me to laud the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs under the able leadership of the Prime Cabinet Secretary for the novelty deployed in the development of the Kenya Foreign Policy 2024 that was transmitted to Parliament and is now before you as a sessional paper number 1 of 2025. The formulation of this policy marks a great milestone in providing a clear roadmap for diplomatic relations that appreciates the dynamics of globalization and technological advancement while protecting our national interest. Honorable Chairperson, as the State Department mandated with the facilitating MDAs in upholding international best practices and the prescribed constitutional processes in policy formulation, I'm delighted to report that the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs in developing this policy involved the State Department for Parliamentary Affairs from the initial stages of policy initiation, and hence the policy fully adheres to the recently launched Public Policy Handbook for Kenya 2024. I'm further aware Your Excellency and honorable members, of the extensive stakeholder engagement that was undertaken. The intent was not only to meet the constitutional dictates, but also to incorporate as much opinion as was received. Thus, this very elaborate and well set out sessional paper was realized in the form and structure before us today. My State Department reaffirms its commitment in supporting the other remaining legislative initiatives within the ministry, including the diaspora bill that is being developed by Diaspora State Department. Honorable Chairperson and committee members, allow me to use this golden opportunity to give a glimpse of our role in enhancing the quality of the national government legislative agenda. The State Department, as you are aware, was established by the Fifth Administration in realization of the central place of legislation in supporting the timely achievement of national government agenda. It is imperative to note that the successful implementation of government programs must be anchored on sound policy and legal framework. Consequently, then, we play a pivotal role in coordinating parliamentary liaison services across MDAs through fostering seamless interactions between the executive and parliament, ensuring the effective and harmonious handling of government business within the legislature. In light of the above, the State Department has developed tools to enhance interactions between the executive and the legislature, besides promoting the quality legislation and policy formulation process. The following materials developed have proven to be resourceful to our stakeholders, who include members of parliament. One is the Public Policy Handbook for Kenya. Two is the Guidelines for the Development of National Government Policy and Legislation. Three is the Government Legislative Agenda Schedule, which is a critical framework that carries all the policy initiatives and legislative initiatives that we do as executive. Your Excellency, honorable members, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the integration of technology into the legislative process is no longer an option, but a necessity. As the official repository of government legislative agenda, we have embarked on automating our services in line with the presidential directive to go paperless. I'm delighted this morning to report that we have successfully onboarded our legislative tracking procedures to a real-time digital platform known as LATIS, that is the Legislative Agenda Tracking Information System. We are aware that Parliament has a tracking system for their legislative initiatives, and that is what we are working on across the executive to also have a tracking system of the initiatives that we have. This tool will be critical in tracking and coordinating the legislative and policy development within the executive. The same is currently under piloting, with capacity building having been undertaken across a number of MDAs. The efficiency in LATIS introduces will enhance our collaborative and whole-of-government approach as we deliver on the government legislative agenda. Honorable Chairperson and members, we acknowledge with great appreciation the strides made in accommodating the executive in parliamentary processes. The amendment of standing orders to allow cabinet secretaries to answer questions before the whole House has augmented accountability and transparency. In conclusion, I wish to commend the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs for subjecting this policy to parliamentary consideration, as it is envisaged that the views from the House will enrich the document and make it citizen-centric. The enactment and implementation of the new policy will position Kenya as a proactive and influential player in international relations, committed to leveraging diplomacy for national progress and global prosperity. We look forward, honorable members, to having more of such engagements with your committee and the other organs of parliament, as this will enhance a whole-of-government approach, which is the hallmark of effective collaboration among government institutions. I wish the retreat a fruitful deliberations and progressive outcomes. Thank you so much.
Another round of applause for my dear sister Aurelia. Thank you. It's now my pleasure, before I invite my sister Roslyn Njogu, to just bring to our attention that we've been joined online by a couple of ambassadors, particularly our ambassadors from our multilateral stations. But of particular importance is Ambassador Kiptines in Bangkok, who's been dealing with a lot of issues touching on the diaspora in that East Asia region. And so I think that provides a bit of background as we invite PS Roslyn Njogu to share her thoughts. Thank you very much. Let's put our hands together for her.
Thank you, my brother PS Sing'oei, His Excellency PCS and Waziri wa Maswala ya Ughaibuni na Maswala ya Nchi za Nje, Honorable Nelson Koech, Chair of our committee, my brother PS Sing'oei, my sister PS Aurelia, Herr Matthias Kamp, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, colleagues, and members of parliament of this esteemed committee, ambassadors here in the room, joining us online, colleagues from the ministry and from government, good morning. Good morning. I know I have an opportunity to speak in detail in an upcoming session, so I'm going to make my comments very, very brief, also because I've been threatened by Sing'oei under his breath while he was smiling over here. He was uttering threats. I kid. Waziri, I want to thank you for your leadership of the ministry, but specifically today for your leadership in pushing this foreign policy conversation to a sessional paper. It was your dream, and I think we are at that point now where we are having a national dialogue on matters foreign policy. I want to thank you for that. And for the heavy lifting that has been done by my brother PS Sing'oei and PS Aurelia in bringing together our ministry and Bunge, and for the partnership, of course, of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. This sessional paper is an important opportunity for national dialogue on foreign policy. Very often, I think, we are all asked, but what does this ministry do? How can we touch and feel the work of this ministry? It doesn't build roads, it doesn't build bridges, it doesn't educate children. Can you give us some things to touch and feel? I think that question has been asked another way. Why does the president travel so much? What does he bring when he travels? It has been a feeling of mine for a while now in the 2.5 years, 2.25 years that I've been in this ministry, that all our policies, including the foreign policy, needs to take a decisively people-first approach. It must always be about the people. This sessional paper gives us an opportunity to do just that, to submit the work, the policies, and our ideas around what we do to a national conversation in Bunge and with citizens of this country to ask themselves these questions about what we do. I would like to propose that diaspora diplomacy is a key touch point for making a foreign policy a people-first document. Diaspora diplomacy allows us to touch and feel people. For people to touch and feel diplomacy, for people to touch and feel the work that this ministry does. Our diaspora now is 4 million strong. 4 million people around the world is bigger than the population of Nairobi during the day. It is an army out there. And we are entering a new era of diaspora diplomacy, where we are seeing increasingly the diaspora playing a critical role in business, in economics, in development. Diaspora remittances, for example, have now outstripped not just other sources of forex, which are your usual coffee, tea, horticulture, tourism, but also foreign aid. And that's an important thing to flag, particularly following Matthias's conversation about aid and where that direction is going. So this sessional paper allows us, or gives us an opportunity to think about how the diaspora can be a decolonizing force and how the diaspora can play a critical role in decolonizing countries and in funding countries. But we've also entered an era where we're increasingly seeing our diaspora taking up political leadership in other countries. What does that mean for us in terms of diaspora diplomacy? How can we extend our own reach in these places? But as that has grown, we've also seen a growth of diaspora in crisis. We've seen, with the growth of Kenyans in political spaces, in business, in economics, we've also seen a growth in crisis because we've also seen a growth of labor mobility, labor migration, sometimes to places that are, haven't been very safe or haven't been very welcoming to Kenyans. And therefore, as a people, we need to have a structured response to that crisis, to that portion of our population that is on the move and that is in crisis. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to a deeper conversation then today and eventually in Bunge on how, as a nation and through this sessional paper, do we protect, engage, and empower and prosper Kenyans in this space. Asanteni sana. Thank you, PS.
Thank you very much. Thought-provoking views again by my sister Rosaline, and I think her articulation of this process or diaspora diplomacy as enabling people first diplomacy, I think, is one that we must reflect upon. I was going to argue that our policy now is Africa first policy. And so I think from the top, we're talking Africa first, but from the bottom, I think it's people first. And I think it's a very powerful approach. Your Excellency, allow me now to invite the Chair of the Defense and Foreign Relations Committee in Parliament, the Honorable Nelson Koech. Thank you. Let's put our hands together kindly.
Thank you, Dr. PCS, Dr. Singoe, OPS, Dr. Njogu, and Dr. Aurelia Rono, the entire Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our Conrad Director Matthias, entire Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our friends who are here today for this important retreat. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I will be extremely brief because, and I don't know if we missed something we should have done introduction, because these colleagues will not be very fair with me if I do not allow them to do an introduction. And since anyway I will not have an opening remark, our opening remarks have been overtaken by events, looks like, because Kemp, the director of Conrad, has had a very, actually delved deep into the agenda of today's meeting, that if we were to go back to opening remarks again, it looks like we will be reintroducing something that it's way past where it should have been. But very thoughtful of you, particularly on the mention of focus on investment rather than aid. Then the question is, so as we look at this foreign policy, should we then also, in the same breath, relook at our traditional funding partners to probably realign to where probably the East or the Middle East, and I've seen many countries that are looking at that. I think it's probably a debate that we will have. But PCS, just to bring to your attention, this team has had a very, very robust engagement on this document of foreign policy. They have been very insightful on comments, and some of them have been, we will listen to them later, very, very constructive, particularly from the lawyers that are in the committee, and former diplomats like Honorable Yusuf, who's had he has reservations on some of the issues. I'm sure he'll highlight them. The report that we got from when we went for public participation, that we, as a committee, we looked at it this week on Tuesday, on Tuesday, and very, very interesting comments from people out there. So very quickly, let's members, let's introduce ourselves. I'll start with my Vice Chair, Honorable Bashir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Major Bashir Abdullahi, the Vice Chair of the Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committee and a Member of Parliament for Mandera North.
A very good morning. I'm Irene Kasalu, MP Kitui County and member of this committee.
Good morning. My name is Memusi Kanchori, MP Kajiado Central.
Good morning. My name is Yusuf Hassan. I'm the MP for Kamkunji and a senior ranking member of this committee.
Good morning. My name is Freddy Kana, Member of Parliament, Shinyalo constituency, and a future senior ranking member of the committee.
Morning, I'm Moses Krima, MP Central Menti, and a member of the committee.
Honorable Wangara has stepped out, but she'll be joining us. Honorable Millie Odhiambo has sent her apologies. She's out of the country. Honorable Kandia is here. I think he's just stepped out also. Honorable Sloya, a Member of Parliament from the PCS backyard, has been unwell for some time. We pray for his quick recovery, but we will also be briefing him on what the outcome of this meeting. So, like I said, I omitted a very huge section of my opening remarks. But as a Foreign Relations Committee in the National Assembly, we recognize the dynamic and evolving nature of the international relations. Kenya's foreign policy has long been anchored on the pillars of peace, diplomacy, economic diplomacy, diaspora diplomacy, environmental diplomacy, and cultural diplomacy. These principles have guided our engagement with regional and international partners, ensuring that Kenya remains a key player in the global affairs. However, as we look forward into the future, it is imperative that we assess the effectiveness of our diplomatic engagement and identify areas that require reinforcement of our diplomatic engagement and identify the areas that require reinforcement or realignment. This briefing, therefore, Honorable PCS, provides us with an opportunity to deepen our understanding of the objectives and implementation strategies outlined in Sessional Paper number 1 of 2025. The only areas that we probably want to look at is, as we engage today, let me emphasize on some very critical areas that I think warrant our attention. And number 1 is Kenya's economic aspiration, demand a foreign policy that supports trade expansion, foreign investment, and market diversification. How do we then leverage a global economic framework such as African Continental Free Trade Area to boost Kenya's economic growth and international trade relations? That's number 1. Number 2, Kenya continues to play a vital role in promoting peace and security within the region. Our diplomatic engagement in Southern Sudan, Somalia, and Great Lakes regions have been significant. How can we further enhance our contribution to conflict resolution? This will continue being providing peacekeeping, yet we have our own challenges as a country. Should we focus on our country and forget about continuing with peacekeeping? So those are some of the engagements. And in public participation, I don't know if it was Kenya National Human Rights. They actually had a concern on our continued mission, continued as a country, our continued efforts in peacekeeping, because they argue that we still find that in the budget, for instance, you want to spend about 5 billion in this financial year to send our officers to Somali for transition forces, AWSOM. But yet, we have our challenges as a country. So should we review that and refocus on the country? Those are some of the things that were raised in the public participation. The Kenyan diaspora is critical economic and social asset to our nation. Their remittances, Madam Jogo, investments and knowledge transfer have far-reaching impacts. What strategies can we adopt to strengthen diaspora engagements and support their integration into the national development efforts? I have 2 more to go. Climate change, I can see Dr. Singoye. Climate change is an existential challenge that demands global cooperation. Yesterday, this committee, a few members, have been with the National Intelligence Service, the Mashariki Conference. Very, very engaging. Global and the issues of climate change have come in as a security threat. It's not just any other issue of climate anymore. It's become more of an international security threat. So Kenya, as a host of the United Nations Environmental Programme, has positioned itself as a leader in environment conservation. How do we enhance then our international partnership on climate diplomacy to attract greater investments in green energy and sustainable initiatives? And finally, Your Excellency, Kenya is actively involved and engaged in multilateral organizations such as the East African Union and the United Nations, the East African Community and the Commonwealth. How can we optimize our diplomatic strategy to ensure that our participation in these bodies yield tangible benefits to our national interests? So, ladies and gentlemen, let us take this opportunity to engage constructively, ask pertinent questions, and provide policy recommendations that will strengthen our diplomatic engagements globally. With those very few remarks, I look forward to a very enlightening and fruitful engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your guidance, Honorable Koech. It is now my distinct honor and pleasure to request His Excellency Musalia Mudavadi to come and give his remarks, which remarks I believe will truly highlight the significance of this process. So let's kindly put our hands together, and if you may maybe be upstanding as the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Foreign Minister of the Republic engages us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think it's not for you to stand, but to stretch. If you can do a bit of exercise. I'll excuse my brother, MP for Kamukunji, because he's an elder. He doesn't have to stand. But thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. I'll try and make this very brief because there's a lot of what would I say? A lot of brains itching to share their reactions and knowledge based on the very provocative statements we have had. The Honorable Nelson Koech, Chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations, the honorable members of the committee present here today, principal secretaries, our colleagues also from Defense. Let me also acknowledge our partner, Matthias Kamp, representing the Conrad Group, and all
democracy is threatened
Kenyans
from outside, but is also failing to perform from within. We've
higher,
created slow, overburdening bureaucracies that undermine the performance, and the people are beginning to lose trust in the system if it doesn't deliver for them. And we observe that.
Formal remarks, and then at the end,
we've also been lying to ourselves that the kind of welfare that we can give to the people as the nation state is something that can last forever, and that we can always add a bit on top,
on the sessional paper
and that we can strengthen the state and its legitimacy by constantly giving more handouts and providing more social welfare and so on. And it's part of the crisis of democracy as well. If people get used to the state always taking care of you, it's very easy to get into a legitimacy crisis when you can't take care of everyone anymore.
From the public.
So we need to understand
Kenya's
that
foreign policy.
In Germany, in Europe, we have failed to use the peace dividend well. We have failed to use the times of peace and prosperity to prepare for tougher times. Now we are heading into tougher times, and we are at a decisive moment right now.
To allow for refinement
I'm not
the
too
policies
pessimistic,
it proposes
because if we are honest to
before
ourselves,
they are implemented.
we can pull the right strings, we can make
And
the
I'll
right
repeat
decisions,
that.
we can come
It
out of
is
this
a
crisis
strategy
stronger than
document
before.
presented to
Not with
for
that old
parliamentary
idea of the
scrutiny
West, but
and
maybe
debate
with a
to
strong,
allow for
united
refinement
Europe with strong
of the
partners
policies it proposes
in the world.
before
Business as usual is
they are
over,
implemented.
crisis is the new normal,
As a ministry,
and the old order will not
we have
survive
fully
in its
embraced
current
the
form.
principles of public participation.
And this is where I think it becomes
and
very
even gone a
interesting
notch
for
higher
Kenya to come
to
in,
engage members of parliament,
because
who are the
one
people's
is
representatives.
Kenya has shown its commitment
Let
to
me take this
multilateralism
opportunity to
and to
appreciate the
strengthening
National
and
Assembly
sustaining a rules-based
for further
international
extending
order,
the
but at the
arc
same time,
of public
Kenya has been a very
participation
strong voice on the
by
need to
availing
reform
and
the
subjecting
international
sessional
order.
paper to
So
public
this,
scrutiny.
I think, is an opportunity that we are
You
looking
will
at.
note from the top page of the sessional paper,
In very concrete
a
terms,
Kiswahili theme,
from the German perspective,
Sera ya
what is
Kenya
happening
ya
now
uhusiano
and
wa
what will
nje
need to happen
na
under the new
nchini
incoming
hadi
government
mashinani.
is, one,
The
a
objective
massive need for reforms, an
emphasize
actual
the
transformation
new
of
foreign
our
policy
bureaucracy,
approach
our welfare, our
that aims
infrastructure.
to involve
We
our
need to address the rise of populism, the crisis of democracy. We need to
citizens right
face the
from the
demographic
grassroots
challenge.
to the
The
international
demographic
stage.
development in Germany and Europe is quite
This is the
a
essence
contrast
of our new
to
policy
what is
direction,
happening in Kenya.
embodied
And we need to
in the
gain back
expression,
our defense
foreign
capacities.
and diaspora policy
The
machinery.
question of European
that
strength and
solidifies
unity
the
and the
national
future role
ownership
in the world is one that
of
concerns
our
us a
foreign
lot.
policy.
If Europe
even as
right
we
now
position
doesn't
Kenya
take the right
internationally.
lessons, doesn't stand together and
The
doesn't
sessional
stand
paper
strong,
provides a framework
we will
for
not
policy
be a
development
big
and
player
implementation.
in the new
It presents
international
several
order.
requests
And it might
for
not be the kind of
consideration by
order
Parliament
that
that
we
are
would
critical
want
to
to
the
see.
conduct of Kenya's foreign policy.
That also means
This
we will need
encompasses
to seek
diaspora
future
issues that are
alliances,
highlighted
stronger alliances
in the Kenya
for
Foreign
strategic
Policy
cooperation
2024
and for the
and
protection,
operationalized
but also
by the
reform
recently launched
of the rules-based
Kenya Diaspora
international
Policy
order.
2024.
Otherwise, we may be heading into a new
The
era
principal
of a
secretaries
new
for
international
foreign
order
affairs and
that is
diaspora
primarily
affairs
based on the bully principle.
We'll speak
The big
to
players
these
will have their
issues
way.
in greater detail during the next
They will
session.
distribute and demarcate their
The
spheres of
overarching
influence.
request is for Parliament
The Americans
to
on the one hand, the Chinese on the
approve
other hand, maybe the
and
Russians,
adopt the contents
the Russians
and recommendations
thriving
of the
for
sessional
dominance, even
paper.
within
At the core
Europe,
of these requests
taking
is the
control
goal of
of Western
promoting
Europe.
a holistic approach
Interestingly,
financing
there's
our
a big
foreign
question
policy
mark when it comes to Africa,
maximize
because it's not so
effective
clear who the
utilization
bully
of
will
Kenya's
be on the
assets
continent
abroad,
here.
and
I don't know whether
bolster
that's good or
the
bad
foreign
news.
service staff
History would show us
through
it's bad
improved
news.
terms of service and a
Because
structured
if the
process
big players
professional
use
recruitment
Africa as their
and
battleground,
deployment.
it's the African countries that will suffer the most.
As the
And we've
founding
seen that in
document
the
of the
history
sessional paper,
as well in
The
colonialism
Kenya
in the
Foreign
Cold
Policy
War era.
2024 provides a comprehensive framework.
We'll have a new government
for
in
conducting
Germany,
the
and
country's
I'm
foreign
eagerly
relations
looking forward to that
and
because the
diplomatic
chairman of my
engagement.
party is hopefully going to
It
be
aims to promote
the
and
next
safeguard
chancellor of Germany, and he's
our
going to be a
national
good
interests
chancellor, and we
and
will
enhance
hopefully
the country's
address
global
these
standing.
challenges in the right way. But it's also not
Indeed,
something we
as
can
the
take
theme
for
of the
granted.
sessional paper suggests,
You'll follow the news
this
in
is
the
a
coming
grand
weeks.
strategy for
It's a bit
positioning
quiet
our foreign
right now,
policy in the ever-evolving
but it's
global
not a done
landscape.
deal. So we
This
have
is why
a tricky situation in
instead of
Parliament
dwelling
with the
so
extremists
much on
on the
pillars,
left and right having gained
we
votes,
now
and
have
it's
focused
very
areas
complicated for us
to reflect
to
the
form a government,
adaptability of our foreign
because we
policy
will be leading that
to the
government, and
rapidly
everybody is
mutating
expecting for us to
global system.
turn things around and push for
We have to
fundamental
be
change
prepared
within Germany, but
for
we
the
have to
emerging
form a
geopolitical
coalition
transformation,
with the party that was leading
which
the
is
previous
creating
government.
serious challenges, including
So
a
managing
new
that
scramble
transition
for Africa
with the previous leaders,
subsequent
with the Social
resurgence
Democratic Party
of the
that,
Cold War.
in my
The
view,
unfolding
is not
world
yet
order
responding
is that of
honestly to the
multipolarity
kind of questions I
and
raised.
unipolarity,
So we will have to still
unilateralism
heading there,
rather than
but we still have a
multilateralism,
few days, a few weeks, and I hope the outcome
protectionism rather than
is
free
going to
trade,
be good. What
and growing
comes out
indifference and transactional
from the
conduct
coalition talks so
rather
far,
than
and I
humanitarian.
just want to highlight maybe what is relevant from
The
the
outcome
Kenyan
is that
perspective,
states
are just a handful of
are largely
things.
taking to the
One is a
realism
very
world
clear priority
of
for
viciously
security
pursuing
and defense.
selfish
So one thing
interests
that the
and
incoming
getting
government
more
already did
inward-looking.
in the outgoing ongoing parliament
continue
is
adapting
to have a
and
constitutional
successfully
change
navigating
that
this
allows
evolving
us to
global
go
landscape.
beyond the
We
debt
have to be
ceilings,
strategic
beyond the
and
limitations, so
ambiguous
that in theory,
fencing
we can have
our
endless spending on
interests
defense.
and projecting Kenya's position
That's
on
quite
matters
a
of
remarkable
geopolitical
step for
significance.
Germany.
In this regard,
And that means we
the
are waking
sessional
up.
paper makes a bold
You don't
assertion
achieve peace by making yourself
the
weak.
Kenya country position
Another
on
one is
strategic
that
foreign policy issues,
we will be looking into
including
diversifying trade
a
and supply
two-state
chains.
solution to
That
the
was already the
Israel-Palestine
case
conflict.
2 weeks ago, but I think the
Pacific
determination will even
resolution
be
of the
stronger looking at the
Ukraine-Russia crisis
what happened 2 days ago
and the
with
One
Trump
China
now,
policy.
in the US.
The objective
A
is
third
to
one,
authoritatively articulate,
focus on investment rather than
and
aid.
advance Kenya's
Germany will
national
be
interests in
committed
the
to
complex
development cooperation,
and ever-changing
but the incoming
global
German
arena.
government will change the
It
modalities
will further
of
advance
development
Kenya's
cooperation.
ability
I think that comes with opportunities
and
for
resolve to
Kenya.
deploy policy actions that
And
protect
also, we'll be
and promote
seeking
the
stronger
interests and welfare
alliances
of our
with
citizens,
non-traditional,
wherever they are
but
in the
somehow
diaspora.
still like-minded
Finally,
partners.
we look forward to
And I put
open
Kenya in that
and
category,
interactive
and I know the
discussions.
German embassy does.
This will
and I know the
enable us
Ministry
to
of Foreign
deliver a
Affairs in
final
Germany
document
does.
that comprehensively
So,
addresses
what I hope to see
all
from the incoming
perspectives
German government when it
of
comes
our
to
national
international
interests
cooperation
and
is
Kenya's
a more
transformative journey
strategic,
in the
a more
emerging world
interest-based,
order.
and yes, also a
And
more
Mr.
transactional
Chairman, your
approach
committee
to international partnership.
is so pivotal
And that's an immense
in this
opportunity for
regard.
Kenya. But
So,
if we now look
I've
at
finished
the,
those formal
the
statements,
Kenyan angle,
but
and
first
you will
let me
know
just
much better than me, that's why I'll
Matthias,
just tickle you a bit. At the
first of all,
Kenyan
for the support you
perspective
have
on what is
lent
happening
us,
in the world, yes, it will come with
extended to
immense
us in terms
challenges.
of
That global economic
process
recession that
that
we'll
has
be
brought us
heading
where we
into
are.
now is going to hit you
but
hard.
also for being very
The tariffs
candid.
are going to hit you hard, and the possible
when he came
domino
to see me
effect
and
of
we
that
had
will
a-
hit you hard.
A
And
chat, I told him, look, what
we
you're
all
saying
know
is
that
so
what
critical.
the markets and investors
cannot
hate the
be for my
most
ears
is
only.
uncertainty.
I think,
And as long as we have that
an
president in the
opportunity, and
US,
I'm happy you did that. In fact, you
and
may
the
have
US
adjusted your
continuing to
departure
play a dominant role, we will have
to
uncertainty.
travel out of the country.
I
so
think the
that
one thing that
you
is
can be
certain
with
with
us to
Trump is
make,
uncertainty.
your statement.
Aid funding is going
I can,
down.
Indicate that
We've all talked about the impact of US
I
aid
think I was
being
also
stopped
shocked
and pulling out, and the implications
into
for
reality.
employment in Kenya and so on.
I'm sure
And there is
my
more
colleagues,
push in that direction. We know where the UK is heading with development
appreciate that
cooperation.
those
We've
are
heard the
very
announcements in the
thought-provoking,
Netherlands. Germany will stay
comments.
committed to
It's a
development
serious
cooperation,
wake-up call
but the
as we
modalities will
deliberate on
change.
This
But
matters before us.
It might be an opportunity in the long
on a
run,
lighter
but in the
note,
short term, it's gone out.
Conrad was working very closely with the
And
ANC
if we are
party,
very pessimistic, we might even have a crisis of the UN system.
when we were in the opposition. And
If
we
countries
developed
invest
a very
more in their
good
national
working
defense
relationship.
and
Now they are a
decide to
party
invest
in
less
government,
in multilateral institutions,
and the majority
because the
of
idea
you,
of multilateralism
we
is
have the
even
Kenya
being
Kwanza
discredited
government.
left, right, and center. UN
so
agencies will
they have to
struggle.
look at
I
things
don't
now
have to
from a
tell you
different
what it would
prism.
mean for Kenya.
And that
the
partnership
agencies that
that
are
we
based
had
here in Nairobi
when we
have
were
to
both in opposition,
significantly reduce their
I'm happy
spending
he's willing
and
now
let go
to
of
extend it.
thousands of staff.
Because he's now
That is a
wearing the shoe
scenario
of government as well.
that we have to be aware of.
As we move forward.
And also, we are aware of the instability here
a few
in the
things
region.
that
And that instability will be hard to contain, and it might become harder to contain.
hope for is that once
Because the global economic situation and the
committee
challenges arising from that might
has
further
put
fuel
everything
conflicts
together,
and
the
might
final
lead to
document,
more instability,
we definitely look forward to
and
the robust
international
debate in
partners
Parliament
being
and the
busy
endorsement of this
with
sessional paper.
enhancing their own defense
so that,
capacities and dealing with,
we
with
can
their
now
own
move
crisis
forward
in
with
their
more
immediate
clarity,
neighborhoods
and
might
avoid
mean that you'll
guesswork
have a harder time getting
on critical
support
matters of
for the stabilizing force that
our
Kenya
foreign
is here in
policy.
the region.
So I'm
And
really appealing to
Clearly
you
put, Kenya
to
itself
to help
has
us
the
drive
same challenge.
this. And remember,
You
it is
cannot have
the
prosperity
sessional
without
paper number
stability.
1
You cannot have stability without
of
prosperity.
2025.
And addressing both at the same time,
So you and I,
addressing the economic challenges,
plus my
addressing
team at the
challenges
ministry,
of the young population,
are in partnership
and
to
maintaining
deliver
stability
sessional
and making
paper
sure
number
that
1
the grievances are out
of
there don't translate
2025
into
to the
riotism or
Kenyan
violence, I think is
The sessional
is an
paper
immense
has
challenge.
been
But I want
approved by Cabinet.
to close
The first
by talking
position
about
was
the
that Cabinet
opportunities.
approved the
So I
policy
mentioned development cooperation a few times
after
now.
the
Those
conversation.
changing modalities
Then
will
Cabinet
be better
approved the
for
sessional
Kenya
paper.
in the long run. In fact,
but
we
it
have
is
been
clear
lobbying
that
for
Cabinet
Before I came to Kenya,
was
I
approving the
I was,
sessional paper
based in Berlin
because
for 4 years.
they knew very well
we worked
that
with
Parliament is the pillar and the anchor, and parliamentary
the CDU
input
party very
on our
closely
foreign policy is going to
when
be
they were in
extremely
opposition.
critical.
Now they are,
Because this
they
is a
will be
thing
back
that
in
we have
government.
not been
But obviously,
pursuing
when your party is in
aggressively.
opposition, that's the time you
We want
use
to change that course
for
and make
groundwork.
sure that Parliament
To make
is
the politicians
deep
understand how things need to be done differently.
into the whole
When
process
they don't rely on the ministerial
of
bureaucracies and all the
helping
experts
us
in
direct
government,
our
they'll
foreign
come looking
policy.
for your advice.
It will
in your
make it
political
easier
foundation. That's what we've been
to
doing,
deal
and
with
we've been
budgetary
lobbying for that.
issues. It will make
I don't
it
even have a
easier to
problem
deal
with Germany
very
not
many
having a
other
ministry for
challenges
development
that
cooperation
arise.
anymore. We can do it under foreign affairs.
In
If it
this
saves
policy,
us
critical
money on the bureaucracy,
and sessional paper,
fine. The commitment
Cabinet
to
did
development
approve
cooperation and maybe even
that
enhanced spending on development
you
cooperation needs to be there, but
now
not
need
with
to
the
look
logic
at
of aid.
the foreign policy, as you have
Not
always
with the
advocated, the foreign
donor-recipient relationship, but with partners
aspect
in
of it,
business,
pillar,
with
if I may
partners in
call
security,
it that way,
with partners who sit together,
as a security
agree on where you can work together on clearly
related
spelled out
function. So
interests,
Cabinet approved that position.
and work on a win-win situation.
And you as Parliament,
And Kenya
you
is ready
had
for it.
always raised this
I think
as
there
well.
are very
So
few
this is an opportunity for
developing
us
countries, if we even want to
to
use that term, who are as ready for that as
put
we
it on the table beyond any reasonable
with the
doubt.
logic of interest-based cooperation, with the logic
That
of investment for prosperity.
That is where it lies. And
I
going
also
into
do
the
think,
future,
and I got a bit
that
encouraged.
should be
We
the way to
had
look at it. We want you to help us
our
unlock
Ministry of Defense with a large
the
delegation
potential
here this week.
of our international
I also
assets.
had a dinner with a delegation.
Other countries are
and
reaping very serious dividends from
there
their
is
international
very
assets,
strong interest
while
in
we
reorienting
are
also
not doing the same.
Germany's security
And in fact,
position
in some
different regions in
instances,
the world.
we have even run away
And the Horn of Africa is
from occupying our own assets
where they are aware that
because we have not been
engagement needs to be
maintaining
stronger.
them.
And the PCS, we talked about it the other
So
week.
this is an opportunity for the
we will continue
defense,
lobbying for that.
for the committee to
The
help
ministry
us
indicated
deal
that
with
their doors
that.
are open. We will
We
continue
have
lobbying for
issues to
more
talk to,
European
and I'm happy that
for
defense
dealing with the crisis here in the region.
team is also
And we
here.
know who has the
You raised a very
leadership
fundamental
in
question about peacekeeping and all
in
that.
the region here. So I think that is
This was
an
one of the
immense
flagships of
opportunity.
Kenya
The fact that
in
Kenya
the context
has established itself as a
leadership
strong
on the
voice
continent.
for multilateralism.
We have
The commitment
suffered a
is strong, and
setback,
it's not
and I
just
think
the rhetorics of
in
your
the committee
president,
you
it's
will get
also
the
showing
rankings.
You can take the
We are
Haiti
now
mission
about
and many
number
other
30-something
examples where Kenya has
in
shown,
that
or,
realm globally,
take it when it comes to climate
in terms of
diplomacy, but Kenya has
peacekeeping.
not just shown its commitment
And
to
countries-
multilateral solutions by
And
rhetoric,
there's no harm in mentioning
actually
this
by
from a
action.
positive
And as the
perspective.
world
But
changes and
countries
we're
like
looking at
Rwanda
a reshaping
have risen to
international
become
order,
number
let's
4
take up that
globally
opportunity. And the
in terms of
architects
peacekeeping
the new
efforts.
international order will not just sit in Washington,
While
or
Kenya
Paris, whatever.
has
That's
completely
going to be, and it has to
disappeared
be
from
an inclusive
the
international
radar
engagement. And I
on this
think
matter.
Kenya
So
on the
it is
African
something
continent,
that we need
will play a
to
lead role,
interrogate
when it comes to that.
quite effectively.
Kenya has also
We
been
need
very
to promote
progressive
trade.
on the trade aspect.
We need to promote
Just take the
investment.
example of the EPA.
It has been
and
said,
how Kenya is bolder and moving faster.
and nobody is blinking. The people in Washington are not blinking anymore.
As the US
They are
decided
telling you
to
openly
pull
that we are
out,
coming for this
I mean,
or that.
Donald Trump basically announced that the US doesn't
So-
want globalization anymore.
Let us also come to
Close
the
your
stark
borders,
reality
produce everything
that we have to change our
and
approach.
on your own you can take care of yourself. That's the long-term vision they have.
We have to combat
The rest of the world doesn't have that. China doesn't have that vision.
issues
Europe doesn't
that
have
are
that vision.
negative,
Kenya doesn't have that vision.
corruption,
So what are we going to make? How do we turn that crisis
money
into an
laundering,
opportunity for creating more
vices
international
that
connections,
undermine
for
stabilities
more
of
free trade for the
of
sake
nations.
prosperity.
I think we need to pronounce ourselves very
Lastly,
clearly
you have a very young,
on some of these
well-educated,
things,
resilient
so
population,
that as we move forward,
far more resilient than the German
we need to
population.
understand what kind of
In
policies.
Germany now
Yesterday
we
I
have
came
young
in, last
people
night I came
entering
from
talk shows
Rwanda.
left, right, and center
I was
talking
representing
about how they would rather
the
surrender to
president,
Russians now than ever
and
to fight.
the issue was
Ask Kenyans the same,
the topic
and
of the
answer
fourth
will be fundamentally
revolution.
different. That's a big plus.
Basically,
And
artificial intelligence.
You still have young people. We don't have many young
globally,
people.
what is it going to do? What is going to be the impact
Rosalind, you're laughing.
in our society?
We will turn that into an opportunity as well. So here's an example. Tomorrow I'll be on
And
plane.
some of the big players
with
made
a delegation
announcements
from East
that in Africa
including
they want to have
colleagues
5
from the diaspora
centers
docket, and
that
we will talk about
will
labor
be
migration and the opportunities.
the key
We know
global
that the income will be as committed
hubs,
to pursuing that. as
the
the
GPU
current
hubs, South
So these are
Africa,
a few
Kenya,
things I just wanted
Morocco,
to throw at you.
Egypt,
And
and
I hope
think Nigeria.
it can tickle your brain a
So
bit.
Kenya is one of them,
One thing
targeted
that we need
to become
is honesty.
a central
I can
nation
be more honest
in
than
this
our ambassador because I'm
new
not
era around artificial intelligence
need,
and what
and that's
it
just
portends.
my appeal. Push the
So
Germans, push
we
the
need to
Germans,
prime
force
ourselves
them
and set
to be honest, to sit
ourselves
down and have an eye-to-eye
into
dialogue.
good stead.
The ball is in your court.
The war
The
on
Germans, the
tariffs is
Europeans
so
are
clear.
the one who need to panic a lot more about the current situation than you do. The opportunities are on your side.
But even as we
So as you sit at the table,
wake up every morning looking at
articulate your interests clearly,
what
but
the
force
Americans have
German
said
side
on
to
tariffs,
also spell out very clearly what is your interest.
it also
What's
gives
in
us
it
an
for
opportunity to
what's
say
in it for
that,
you. Let's not beat around
what
the bush.
about in the
Nobody's doing
continent?
anything
To
out
what
of
extent are
altruism,
we
so let's
ourselves,
identify
even within
where
our own
can
continent,
our interests come together,
dealing
where
with
can we achieve something together.
trade
Ultimately, we
barriers,
do all
whether
that
they are tariff or
based on an
non-tariff
understanding
barriers.
that we share
These are
values.
issues that we may want to
And not because we've
look
been
at.
traveling
On
around
multilateralism,
preaching about
perhaps
how we do things back
as
at
I
home,
sit now,
but a shared understanding of how an international order needs to look like, where countries like Kenya and Germany can thrive. And we want stability.
we need to have less faith.
Now I'm going to do something, also because I'm not a diplomat, I'll leave you with one warning. There are players out there that share an interest in stability. There are players out there that do the opposite, that thrive on instability. I am not so sure about the US under Trump,
Then
but we can't rule
let
out
us
that part of their
rethink
agenda
and realize
is
that
to trigger more instability for their own advantage. The Europeans struggle with the competition from China, and we have a very tricky attitude and a very tricky relationship. Now we might be forced to move closer
these
to China
particular
because of Trump.
opportunities.
But there's
If you
one
look
thing
to the
in common we
bottom,
have with the Chinese, that's the interest in
so depending on where you're sitting, right or left
China
corner,
is interested in stability,
nearest
in
to
partnering
Honorable
countries
Koech,
where you can
is the
invest, where you
strategic
can-
benefits of the DPA is to create
I mentioned
these
the
opportunities
people
abroad.
who bullies out there. Russia is a
National interests and vision
I have
2030.
question marks about Trump and the US. I am pretty sure about the Chinese and
It
their
is the
interest in stability. I'm pretty sure about the
justification of
Russians
this
and their
process
interest in instability.
through
Make
it
no
as well.
Russia
The legal
thrives on
gaps, the
instability.
institutional gap
Russia doesn't have the economic power
clear,
to be
and
an
on that
attractive
basis,
partner and to-
we will
to
see
come in
legal
with massive
reform
investment.
and
Where
legal
Russia can play a
advancement
role
being
is
put
where
in
there's
place to
instability.
ensure
Because what
that
they
we
do
have
have
in
is
place
mercenary,
the right
weapons,
norms and the
is
right
military
institutions. We
not
hope
caring
to
so
secure
much
enhanced
about
policy
people's
consistency,
I'm sorry to say that.
as
You can
well
beat
as
me for that and
legislative
say, well,
oversight
you are
on
the
your
biased
part.
German, you just have an issue with
But
Russia
most
that we don't
importantly,
have.
I think you
I
are
want to
aware
throw that out here,
that,
because my role today
and I think
this
Matthew
morning, I
Kemps
understood
made
to be
this
one
clear,
that is provoking a bit.
the international dynamics at play
I
at the
did that
present
successfully. Thank you
demands,
for
I
having
think,
me.
a
I hope I
new
didn't
way
speak
of
way too
carrying
long.
out foreign policy. It demands
But I wish you all
agility,
very, very fruitful
it demands
deliberations.
responsiveness,
We
it
are
demands
extremely
an
happy to
acute
partner with you,
appreciation
but also, as I
of
said,
what the national
this is your
interest
process.
is.
We are
It
not going to
demands
meddle
that
with those affairs,
there has to
so
be a
don't be
constant
surprised if I
adaptation and
output
upgrading of
pretty
our
soon.
capabilities
Thank you so
in
much.
order to meet emerging challenges that our country and our region Put our hands faces. together again And for with that, this. therefore, in mind, Excellency and Honorable I think you members, haven't really it requires tickled our that minds. I we think have shocked. sufficient support, particularly resource Those of us support, who are to not be able to awake drive that this policy. morning, I think, are wide. It is our hope that through this process of institutionalizing a sessional paper, that we will improve implementation and accountability mechanisms. In terms of the process of the transition, I think we've already discussed this. There's been a policy review and justification. We've assessed key changes in 2024 revised edition. We've carried out comprehensive stakeholder consultations, and the drafting of the sessional paper was done. And like PCS mentioned earlier, Cabinet approved it, and it has been submitted to Parliament for purposes of hearing and submission, and as well as final debate and adoption. It is our hope that it will be adopted in the near future and integrated into national policy and budgetary planning. I think I alluded to what we call the focus areas. There are 8 of them now, but like I say, they don't exist in isolation. They don't stand, they can stand on their own feet, but they interact in a very dynamic environment, and that's why I made the allusion that we're talking about concentric, mutually reinforcing concentric circles which define our priorities. You can see from these an appreciation of new and emerging areas of foreign policy. I think we have discussed, for example, matters of environmental and climate change, and more fundamentally matters science, technology and innovation. His Excellency Prime Cabinet Secretary just mentioned that he came out of Rwanda, where he attended the Artificial Intelligence Summit that was convened by the government of Rwanda and the AU to discuss Africa's roadmap, for leveraging on AI. Again, these are areas that are beginning to inform not just ordinary areas of engagement, but also the military domain. The use of AI in the military domain is increasingly becoming a critical issue. I think my sister Rosaline will discuss at length diaspora diplomacy. But aside from these new areas, there are also older areas that we need to be able to optimize. The social, cultural resources of our country, the social cultural assets of our country need to be optimized for purposes of attracting investment, particularly in areas such as tourism, and many other areas. And there is scope for us to work with the State Department of Tourism and Wildlife and other like-minded institutions to be able to advance our priorities. I think mention has been made on the centrality of economic and commercial diplomacy, particularly the issues around investment and trade, and the fact that this is a domain that at the present is experiencing, I think, quite some volatility associated with developments in the United States and reactions from different players. A reality that might push the world into a recession, God forbid, but nevertheless a reality that demands our urgent, active engagement with. For example, yesterday when President Trump imposed tariffs on Kenya, 10% tariffs, immediately we need to define a path to address the impact of that on our apparel sector, an apparel sector that has benefited from a free trade agreement, for the whole continent, known as the AGOA framework, that allows us to import into the United States, at preferential terms. What is the impact of these tariff on the AGOA framework? All right. So there are lots of dynamic developments, that present threats, but also present opportunities for us in the economic and commercial aspects.
The State Department,
this transition, it is expected, will lead to several outcomes. The legal recognition and enforceability of foreign policy objectives is one of the central ones. I mentioned earlier the issues around coherence and interagency coordination, which is a big issue. I think you in Parliament have particularly been questioning us
We play
about
a pivotal role in coordinating
consistency
services across
with regard to positions that we have
fostering
taken. I think
seamless
in the recent past there's been
between the
several
executive and parliament,
positions that we've taken
ensuring
on the
effective
Sudan, for
and
example,
harmonious handling of
on
government
Eastern
issues
DRC,
within the legislature.
even including
light of the above,
in places like South Sudan.
the department
And
has
sometimes
developed
you hear
tools
different
to enhance
and
interactions between
speaking to the
executive
issue,
and the legislature.
saying sort of different things,
Besides
and it creates a
promoting
bit
the
of
quality
disharmony.
legislation and policy
And for
formulation
those outside the country who are observing us,
following
they
materials
begin to
developed
wonder
are
whether,
to
in
be
fact,
resourceful
we have a
to
common
our
position on the
stakeholders,
matter.
who include
And therefore, it is our hope that through
one,
this
the
process, we
public
will have
policy
even
handbook
greater
for Kenya.
coherence,
Two is the
and
guidelines
greater
for the
coordination.
development
I'm
of
happy that
national
our colleagues
government
from
legislation.
the Ministry of
Three is the
Defense
government
are also
legislative agenda
present here, and
schedule,
they will later on be making their
It's a
own
critical framework
presentation.
that carries all the policy initiatives and
It is,
initiatives that we do.
we have been urged, I think, time and time again, to maintain our leadership in terms of multilateralism and global positioning
into the legislative
of Kenya.
process is no longer an
This is
option,
something
but an
that has
necessity.
given
As the
us
official
respect
repository
and
of
prestige
government agenda,
because we have been consistent on several critical issues globally, and as a result we are getting we're entering into alliances and strategic partnerships with different players, which then requires that we strengthen our capacity to respond to multilateral issues. I don't think I need to discuss the fact that there will be strengthened governance and accountability in foreign relations as a result of this process. In terms of the challenges that we face and the mitigation measures, we still are dealing with delays in policy adoption. I'll give you an example. So recently, Cabinet adopted the position that from a budgeting standpoint, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should be moved from the payer sector.
Will enhance our collaborative and whole of government approach as we deliver.
Like I mentioned, we have a virtual audience of our ambassadors in different regions. I want to urge them to observe protocol when it comes to the use of technology.
Cabinet secretaries to answer questions before the
but I was
augmented accountability and transparency. In conclusion,
to move the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the security sector. We have experienced quite some resistance from some of our bigger brothers. I don't want to mention them, I think you can imagine.
The enactment and implementation
and that
of the
resistance
new policy will position Kenya
means
as a
that
proactive
those expectations on our parts has been undermined, and it means that the programs that we had put in place to address some of the constraints and to strengthen our diplomatic engagement, would not be realized. And again, we really hope that this is something that Parliament, through your distinguished committee, can be able to help us deal with. I think that deals with both bureaucratic and political resistance, as well as the resource constraints that I mentioned. In terms of mitigation measures, I think we are doing everything, ladies and gentlemen, to continue engaging stakeholders, to explain ourselves, and to put ourselves forward with regard to why we do what we do, and link it to the critical delivery of government. We have enjoyed political and legislative goodwill of your committee. We hope that that goodwill will extend to Bunge writ large, particularly when it comes to the discussion of the sessional paper on the floor of Parliament. We are beginning a campaign on policy advocacy and awareness creation at Mashinani. And you will be seeing the results of this, in the near future. And most importantly, we are not just sleeping and relying on the resources that you have earmarked for us. We are also trying to build partnership, and I'm really grateful, for example, that the government has been standing with us in this regard. We are forging partnerships with institutions such as JICA, with institutions including China, not just relying and putting our eggs in
Nelson Koech,
our
Chair
traditional
of our
partners
committee, my brother
who are going
Pastor
through
Noel,
their
Pastor
own
P.S.
transitions at the moment.
Aurelia,
And so
Matthias
to be able to
Lam,
supplement and to address the resource gaps that we have,
Tifto,
we are
colleagues,
also quite proactive
and,
in building
members
partnerships.
Of Parliament of this esteemed
To conclude,
committee,
ladies and gentlemen,
here in the room, joining us online,
this is the first time
from the
our foreign
ministry
policy
and
is
from
being
government.
transformed into a
Good
sessional
morning.
paper.
Good morning.
I think very few countries have gone this far.
I know I have an opportunity to speak
It will
in
give
detail
our country
in
an
our- in
opportunity
upcoming session. So I'm going to make my
to
comments very
own
brief,
our foreign policy
also because
priorities
I've
and
been
develop
threatened by
a common
Singapore
understanding
and Brett while he was
across
smiling at the idea.
administration, so that it will not matter that there will be a new administration in 2 weeks.
Waziri, I want to thank
It will
you
not
for your
matter
leadership
who
of
that
the
will be,
ministry, but specifically
because
today
we
for
will
your
have a
leadership
joint
in
or a common
this
and a shared
foreign
understanding
policy conversation
of what
to
our
national
priorities
people.
are.
It was your
And,
dream,
and,
I
and,
think we are about
related to
to
that
be
is that we
having a
will
national
sustain a
dialogue
commitment to
on
effective
matters foreign
implementation
policy. I want to thank
and
you for
review.
that.
And
for
our
the heavy
hope
lifting
is
that
that
has
that
been
will
done
lead
by
to
my brother
the
P.S.
strengthening of
Aurelia,
Kenya's position in regional and global affairs,
P.S. Aurelia in bringing
and enhance
together,
collaboration
our
amongst
ministry in
stakeholders.
and
Allow me with those
partnership of
short
also,
observations,
Congrats,
knowing that you have internalized the policy and the
This
sessional
sessional paper
paper,
is
and knowing
an
that you will be
opportunity
asking us
for
difficult
national
questions
dialogue
after
on
this,
foreign policy. Very
to
often,
invite my sister,
we are all asked,
my
but
sister
what
Rosaline
is
to
this
come and
ministry?
make her presentation
How can
on
we touch
diaspora
and
affairs,
see the work of this
so that
ministry?
we can have a
It
joint
doesn't do
session
roads, it
of
doesn't
Q&A.
do bridges, it
Thank you
doesn't
very,
do
very much.
children.
Let's put our hands together for
Give us
Rosaline.
some things to touch and feel. I think that question has been asked another way. Why does the president travel so much? What does he bring?
Thank you, P.S. Singoe.
It has been a feeling of mine for a while now in the 2.5 years, that 2.25 years that I've been in this ministry, that all our policies, including the foreign policy, needs
Okay,
to take decisively people first.
Thank you, colleagues.
approach.
I'd like to pick up
It must always be about the people.
the
The
conversation.
sessional paper gives us an opportunity to do just that. To
Is this a siren
submit
or what?
the work, the policies, and our ideas around what we do to a
Okay,
national
I'll attempt to
conversation
proceed,
in
and I
Bunge
hope you will
and
put up
with citizens of
the
this country
presentation.
to ask themselves these
Um,
questions about what we do. I would like to
Do
propose
we have the presentation
that
up?
diaspora diplomacy is a
But so
key
picking up
touch
on
point
where
for making
my brother Singoe has
people
left
first
off,
document.
I want us to
Diaspora
have a
diplomacy
conversation
allows us
about
to touch and
what
feel
should guide our
people to touch and feel
conversations
diplomacy, for people to touch
on
and
diaspora
feel the work of this
diplomacy
ministry
and the diaspora broadly
does.
speaking. As we get
Our
into
diaspora
this,
now is strong.
these deliberations on the
People
sessional
around the
paper.
world is
So I'll be
together
raising
in
more
the
questions
Nairobi
than
during the
answers.
day. It is an army out there. And we are entering
I'm waiting
a new
on
era of
someone to
diaspora
load this
diplomacy.
presentation for me. Okay, I'll start.
Where we are seeing increasingly
So
the diaspora
what I'm
playing a
hoping to
critical
do
role in business,
is
in
to
economy,
raise
in development.
questions that I hope at the back of
Diaspora
your mind,
remittances, for example,
honorable
now
members, you will
outstrip
have
not
as we
just
get into
other sources of
these
forex
discussions in the
reserve,
sessional
usual
paper.
coffee, tea,
Again,
horticulture,
to
tourism, but also
note
foreign aid.
that
And that's an important thing.
we do have a
Particularly
detailed
following, Matthias's conversation about
a
aid
detailed document
and where that
by the
direction
Diaspora
is
Policy
going.
2024.
So this sessional paper allows us,
This is
or
not
gives us an
working.
opportunity to think about how the diaspora can be a
Check.
decolonizing force, and how the diaspora can play a critical role in decolonizing.
So I don't know who needs to mute or
countries and
this is
in
fine.
funding countries.
Somebody.
But we've also entered an era where we're increasingly seeing our diaspora taking up political leadership in other countries. What does that mean for us in terms of diaspora diplomacy? How can we extend our own reach in these places?
I do hope that we can still have them join the meeting. This is important.
We've seen
Okay.
with the growth of
So,
Kenyans in
so to
political
note that we
spaces,
do
in
have a
business,
diaspora
in economy,
policy,
we've also seen
the long form document of some of the things that I'm raising, honorable members and colleagues, that really goes in depth, not just into diaspora diplomacy, but our approach to the diaspora more broadly. And I want to thank the vice chair of the committee for being with us when we launched the diaspora policy. I believe it was a month ago. Okay. The slide, the first slide number 2, number we keep in pace. Slide number 2 is familiar probably to all of us. Certainly for Bunge, I think every time I have come to ask for money, I have shown you this very colorful slide. I think we are all familiar with I hope we're all familiar with what the mandate of the State Department is, but importantly what our approach to delivering that mandate is, where we begin from the ground up, we protect diasporians, we engage, we empower them, and lead to prosperity not just of our diaspora, but of this nation. So, picking up from where I left off earlier when I spoke during my opening remarks, some questions. What does it mean to have Kenyans in high-ranking positions in foreign governments? What would that mean? And how can we as a country better, and I hate this word, leverage the Obamas of this world? What does it mean to have a dual citizen, a Kenyan American, Kenyan Irish, as Prime Minister, as members of Parliament, as principal secretaries or secretary generals where they are? What could that potentially mean for Kenya? We're beginning to see some of that. In the last few months, we've explored what relationships with leadership or diasporians in leadership in places like the US can deliver in terms of tangible goods for Kenya. Questions. How are we able to better support Kenyans who take up these opportunities in a structured way and make sure that when we go to negotiate agreements with foreign governments, we have our insiders and they can see us behind the tent and we can make progress. We know that countries that have done this, just leave it on slide 2, countries that have done this have succeeded well. We know Ireland, for example, has claimed Obama more than we have. We know that Ireland has done this to help them get out of the, leveraged the Irish in the US to help them get out of and support the Northern Irish. I'm really struggling with this light situation, Northern Ireland situation, and so on. Okay. So, but what does it also mean to have Kenyans leading Google, leading Amazon, leading companies that are now so large that it has meant that leading these companies that are now so large that it has they have taken almost a national or supranational life that governments now negotiate with Amazon or governments now negotiate with Google in the same way you would negotiate with a country, with Coca-Cola. What does it mean to have a Kenyan national leading this kind of budget or influence and so on? Related, but maybe different question. What does it mean to have hundreds of thousands of Kenyans in distress in certain places? And how, therefore, should a government like ours think about these things? I'll give you a quick case in point. And we've had an opportunity to discuss this, including with your committee chair. When a crisis broke out in Lebanon, one of the biggest, it's almost as if the world stops and suddenly we have to attend to some of the most vulnerable people among us. But think about the numbers we have, for example, in Saudi Arabia, 300,000 Kenyans. About 200,000 of those are domestic workers. You literally have 200,000 of your nationals in people's homes. You don't have as good access to them as ideally you would have accountants, lawyers, engineers, and so on. So what does it mean to have those kinds of numbers in those kinds of situations, and how do we ought to think about it? The sessional paper is in good company. policy-wise, so to speak. We have a very robust policy framework that speaks about a lot of things diaspora. Think about the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration that talks about how we ought to think about migration, which Kenya has been leading. By the way, Kenya is one of the champion countries for the GCM. And think about the SDGs. You can think about AU Agenda 2063 and how it sees the diaspora as a critical player in the future of Africa. You can think about the EAC's Vision 2050 and the work we've done in the EAC diaspora policy, where Kenya is leading the formation of an EAC diaspora policy. You can think about others like the IGAD Regional Migration Policy Framework, Vision 2030, BETA, of course. And closer home, you can think about the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and its very generous rights, including dual citizenship and all of these things. But zeroing into today's conversation, why diaspora diplomacy? I've asked some questions around what would it mean then for us to have these very well-placed people in places that can make a big difference for Kenya. But if we have to ask ourselves questions about why should we care about the diaspora and diaspora diplomacy within this conversation, and why we need to be discussing this, and how therefore we need to be thinking about this in the sessional paper, very quickly a few points to think about would be numbers. I already mentioned that we have some 4 million Kenyans living in the diaspora. Again, larger than the daytime population of Nairobi. It is a huge group of people, but it is growing every day. We know in the last 2 years alone, it's grown by over 200,000 of the people we can count. There are many others we can't count. But also because of our demographic, we are an extremely youthful population. We have a median age of 19, and thinking about what the world looks like in terms of demographics, we can expect, and in fact we have prepared for it, we can expect migration to continue. And I believe exponentially. In the next few years, we will have 5, 6, 7, 8 million Kenyans living abroad, because we have a labor mobility program. Kenyan students continue to go abroad, but also a number have settled and are having children, and now we have second and third generation Kenyans. But we also have to remember that our people, wherever they are, including in the diaspora, are our national interest, and our national interest must always be protected. They are also a national asset, as I have demonstrated. Perhaps every MP here has reached out to me at one point or another when there has been a distress matter from your constituents. Perhaps every single one of you. And it is usually a matter of urgency and utmost that requires, speed for resolution. These are political issues. And the distress of Kenyans is not something that is happening far from us. It is something that touches on all of our work every single day. Every day we have to deal with these things. But we also can speak about the potential for investment, for engagement, for enterprise, and so on. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the nuts and bolts of our diaspora diplomacy look like this, right? So we have the rights, welfare, and interests of the diaspora in one bucket. We have the investments, remittances, and technology transfer, and I'll get to the other two shortly. And when we talk about rights, welfare, and the interest of Kenyans, we have the work that we do around BLAs and the need to support that a little bit better.
Security threat. It's not just any other issue of climate change.
I suspect we have two systems going on, or we have joined the meeting as two different computers that are close to each other.
As a host of the United Nations Environmental Program, has positioned itself.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And part of the work we are doing within that bucket of diaspora diplomacy also is to develop a framework for social security transferability and portability. Issues of social benefits portability that you will see coming up mean that after Kandia has worked in Germany for 10, 15 years, he's able to actually withdraw his pension and all of his social benefits and move with that social benefit back home, then is able to invest it here and so on. And these systems don't exist, but this is something that we are pursuing. Of course, there's work around reintegration, supporting consular services, and we've talked about mobile consular services at length, and conducting civic and voter education and so on. And I am aware that you recently met with the technical working group from the diaspora on issues around diaspora voting. The work we do, of course, around investments, remittances, and technology transfer is enhancing diaspora savings. We are working on a diaspora bond, as Waziri will probably mention a little bit later, reducing the cost of remittance. Skills, knowledge, and technology transfer is a critical piece that we are doing, and so on. The next slide, on diaspora engagement and partnerships, we're talking about structured engagement mechanisms, supporting registration of diaspora, encouraging diaspora to be brand ambassadors, the diaspora awards that we started last year, the formation of a diaspora summit, and so on. And then, of course, the other thing that this committee and I engage on much is the work on global opportunities for Kenyans. So our labor mobility project is one of the biggest initiatives under this administration, because, as I said earlier, we recognize that we have an extremely youthful and well-trained population. And there is, on the other hand, a global labor market. And as government of Kenya, we have entered the space and created a global labor market strategy that you're aware of between State Department for Diaspora and the State Department for Labor and Skills Development. And that GLMS outlines how the government is to protect, is to create policy, regulation, but importantly to facilitate people to take up opportunities in this global labor market strategy. All right. So I've spoken a little bit about the key initiatives that we are working on, which is the recruitment policies, the facilitation of bilateral labor agreements or migration and mobility agreements, work that we are doing on recognition of degrees, prior learning, but also mutual recognition of skills and capacity building. Next slide. We can jump that, we move on to the next one. I want to jump directly into specific asks that are important for us within this department, but beyond the department, that are important for us as we push this idea of entrenching the diaspora in our conversations, entrenching the diaspora within the national psyche, and resourcing the diaspora for the reasons that I explained earlier. The first among this is the Diaspora Placement Agency. The DPA currently is established under executive order, and it operates under the State Department for Diaspora Affairs, and its mandate is, as is put out here, is to facilitate diaspora job placements and to manage labor mobility. I often have to answer the question, why does the DPA need to exist when the private sector does recruitment and placement? The answer is very simple. For the same reason Kenyatta National Hospital exists and Nairobi Hospital exists. The problem of unemployment is large enough for us as government to have entered into that space to address. The other reason is that for many years, the cries that you see on the news, including as recently as last week, has been an issue of quote-unquote rogue agencies that have either taken people's money, have not supplied the jobs that are promised. People have been trafficked, as this committee is particularly aware, and so on. But the DPA does an important job. Not only does it connect Kenyans with opportunities abroad at no cost to the Kenyans, it promotes access to international job markets. As all of you here are aware, the spaces that the government can go into the private sector will not be able to go into. But there are also very often conversations at a government-to-government level that will not where governments will not engage private actors. Beyond that, the DPA is tasked with developing Kenyan's talent, brand, and managing that brand. You will hear often that Kenyans are very hardworking, Kenyans, show up, Kenyans wakona kujituma, and so on. That is a brand that must also be safeguarded. It must be highlighted, it must be safeguarded, and we've done some work around this, including, a branding material that helps explain to foreign governments and employers what they need to expect from the Kenyan talent. Establishing international skills, inventory and tracking global employment trends, supporting mutual recognition of skills and qualifications from other countries. We facilitate pre-departure and pre-migration training and reintegration programs. Again, because we sit in this ministry, we have the advantage of being able to connect our people immediately with the embassy or high commission where they're going. We're able to connect them with diaspora associations where they're going and basically simply tell them, if you go to this country, don't hold hands in public. Okay? If you hold hands in public, utakamatwa, and you will be in jail. If you go to such and such a country, this is where you can find unga ya ugali, and this is where you will find, a church and that kind of thing. But we are also advocating for policy improvements related to Kenyan workers abroad, providing ethical recruitment oversight, but also working with private recruitment agents just to support them to do this work better, because we understand that they're a critical player for this, for our labor mobility program. Okay, so next slide, the strategic importance of the DPA, and members, this is important for us, and I think for all of us to understand, because it is an agency that will need a lot of your support. Okay, so of course there are other players including NEA and so on, but NEA's, National Employment Authority's major job is to actually regulate the private recruitment agencies and not necessarily to provide these particular opportunities. If you look to the bottom, so depending on where you're sitting, right or left corner, nearest to Honorable Koech, is the strategic benefits of the DPA is to create these opportunities abroad, to support economic growth through remittances and skills transfer, to encourage diaspora engagement, but also to deal constantly with the question of, are we doing brain drain or are we doing brain circulation by offering structured return pathways, including through what I described Kandia's social benefits portability. The second issue is, now can proceed to the next slide. The second ask is this, and we've discussed it in our various Bunge interactions. The need to have officers on the ground is critical. We all know that the missions have been under-resourced and understaffed, and Pierre Singoi has already spoken to that, and I expect she'll speak to it at a little more. But the work of diaspora officers is very different from the work of trade officers, from the work of political officers or any other officers who are on the ground. In certain key missions, having diaspora officers is critical to the delivery of the work. In places like Saudi Arabia, where we have 300,000 people, the core mandate of a diaspora officer there is welfare. Okay, ensuring that people are being treated right, ensuring that people have a place to go, they can be connected. The purpose of a diaspora officer in places like Germany is to ensure that this agreement that we have signed actually grows legs and helps Kenyans find opportunities in these companies. Okay, so the posting of diaspora officers in these strategic regions allows us to actually grow legs under under this State Department. Otherwise, we continue to service the diaspora as a satellite office and unable to discharge our mandate. And their functions, of course, are coordinating our policy and program for the SDDA, supporting welfare, engaging national development initiatives, remittances and investments, which is critical, strengthening our collaboration between the diaspora and the government, cultural matters, educational exchanges, but importantly providing timely information and policy updates. When we negotiated the German migration agreement last year, we relied heavily on, go back one. When we negotiated the German agreement last year, we relied heavily on the support of diaspora volunteers. Diaspora who've been there a long time, who could tell us, this is some of the things that you need to think about, this is what you need to push for, this is what you need to understand. And of course the embassy staff as well. But when you have somebody whose entire job is to work with the diaspora, to establish welfare networks, to work with them to ensure remittances are going up, to work with them to bring in job opportunities, tourism and so on, then it becomes that much easier. The third ask is one that you're very familiar with, which is the diaspora safe houses. I will speak very lightly to it because I want you to hear from the horse's mouth at some point, and I know when you're talking about financing the foreign policy and investments, this is one of the things that will come up. I was mentioning to the deputy chair of the committee this morning that I believe the committee is aware, and really all of us here in the room are aware that we've had a crisis in Myanmar and Thailand, a crisis of human trafficking. And about 3 weeks ago, because of sustained pressure, some raids occurred on the scam compounds where many nationalities, including Kenyans, had been kept. And Kenyans were able to be rescued and have been at the border of Myanmar and Thailand for some time as they are processed according to Myanmar law and Thai law to ensure that they are truly victims of human trafficking and they're coming home. I'm happy to report that the last group arrives tomorrow at 1 p.m. So there is quite a load off my shoulders as far as that is concerned. But this is the situation across many places. Because of our youthful population and because of labor mobility, you also have human trafficking traveling under labor mobility, firstly. Secondly, even in places where labor mobility is legit, you still have distress cases where people must be housed somewhere as their cases are being resolved. It is no longer an option for us not to have diaspora safe houses. Because what we do by not having safe houses is we actually leave people open to all kinds of wickedness. And we have seen it. Where we do not have safe houses, and I am happy to say, I'm not happy to say it, but Waziri, allow me to say it here, where we don't have safe houses, Kenyans are exposed and they have been in vulnerable situations. They are able to escape from their, sometimes employers, sometimes their captors. They're able to escape human trafficking. Very often they have ended up in commercial sex work, because how do they put a roof over their head? Or they have ended up being trafficked to a second and third person. So for us, as a country that has 4 million people abroad, it is imperative that we are able to protect them. Have safe houses in specific places: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Thailand, Oman, where we have specific hotspots so that people are able to be kept safe for the period that they are there as we process them. Countries that have smaller budgets than we do including Uganda, have huge safe houses, and their people are doing well in some of these really difficult places. In these safe houses, to give them temporary residence, and we're able to secure them, we're able to do psychosocial support, we're able to work with other related agencies, we're able to offer legal and consular services and healthcare support, because sometimes people come to these spaces with broken legs or in really bad shape. So this is something that we really must prioritize. My other ask is on bilateral and multilateral engagements, and let me say this one quickly. On bilateral agreements, on bilateral engagements, we're working and negotiating to implement agreements to protect Kenyan nationals abroad. And by this I mean we're going beyond BLAs and migration agreements to see what else we can do. Multilaterally, we're doing work to address transnational challenges, and the frameworks really of the GCM. I have 5 minutes. I just need 3. No, I'm serious. I'll take the 5. And active participation in regional global platforms, and strategic advocacy and partnership, aligning Kenya's diaspora diplomacy with frameworks such as within the AU, IOM, and global frameworks. As I mentioned when I began, I want to make quick mention of diaspora welfare and engagement, because I know the committee recently engaged with diaspora, with a technical working group from the diaspora on democratic processes, and I know, those matters are alive with you, so I don't need to push that anymore, but just to note that diaspora suffrage is something that is at the top of our minds, and so on. Allow me to say something really quickly about the establishment of the Diaspora Welfare Fund, which is something that we will speak to a little later when we come to speak about the DPA. One of the things that we have learned from countries that have gone ahead of us has been, how do you fund and how do you support things like the increasing cases of distress and so on. The formation of a diaspora welfare fund that is co-funded by government and the contributions of diaspora then would allow us to address various issues, including potentially partly running the safe houses, repatriation, evacuation, and so on. And we will have a better, we'll go into that a little in depth. Diaspora mental health and well-being is something that is critical, and I think I already spoke about social benefits, portability, and reduction of remittance costs. Again, all of these are underpinned by the framework, the large policy framework that I spoke about. Evacuation and repatriation is another thing that we discuss at length every time I come to see this committee. And this is just what we've been able to do in the last 2 years, evacuating and repatriating Kenyans in distress. And I have asked before, and I want to thank the committee because you've always been very supportive in terms of ensuring that we have a budget as far as repatriation and evacuation is concerned. I spoke about the diaspora as the AU's 6th region when I spoke about the framework, the policy framework. Again, this is something important for us to have at the back of our mind as we discuss this sessional paper, to note that the Kenyan diaspora continue to be a crucial national asset and national interest, as I mentioned. I want to quickly speak money. And I know I understand that we have a session on funding the foreign policy. So I don't know if this is the point I should make, PS, this is the point I should make this ask, or whether you want us to have this during the funding process. Okay. So very quickly then, I just want to say that when the financial requirements come up, Honorable Koech and your team, as we usually say, mtuangalie kwa macho ya si ya huruma tu. We are the diaspora critical player in the development of this nation. Let me end by thanking you all in working alongside us to protect, engage, empower, and prosper Kenya's diaspora. Asante sana.
So here's an example. Tomorrow I'll be on
And some of the big players made announcements that in Africa they want to have
Shall
5 centers
who is speaking next?
will be
Thank you very much, PS. Let's appreciate PS once again.
hubs.
Now, Your Excellency, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen,
South Africa,
I just want to alert you that we have 3 sessions lined up.
targeted.
Each of them is 30 minutes. So if you take the time from now for the next 1.5 hours, that would be 2:30. So is it agreeable that we break for lunch at 2:30? We already alerted the hotel that we're going to be late for lunch.
We need to prime ourselves.
We go for lunch around that time. And these sessions are going to be, we are going to have presentations and we are going to have discussants. And I would kindly ask the presenters, sorry.
But even as we wake up every morning looking at what
feedback on what has already been presented. Oh yeah, that's great.
It also gives us an opportunity to say that
that's a great idea. Okay, thanks
the continent
for correcting. So let's have feedback for the next about 10 minutes. Chair, you want to say something?
I saw Naivasha raised his hand, so I just to help you moderate. Naivasha,
because we've been traveling around.
On multilateralism,
have the mic.
Perhaps as I sit now.
All the sessions or just the last session?
How an international order needs to look like.
Wow.
Kenya and Germany can thrive.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, for the opportunity to be able to contribute to the discussion, these important discussions. And I must say that this is one of the few occasions we've had to engage directly with
that share an interest in stability,
government ministries that we oversight. And we've had a lot of enriching presentations, starting with our guest who was left, which was quite a good knee-jerk, I would say, wake-up call for us, and the fact that in fact a lot of things are changing. We are living in a rapidly evolving global landscape,
if you look to the bottom,
in which many of the assumptions that we,
so depending on where you're sitting, right or left,
international relations
nearest to
have taken for granted.
Is the strategic benefits of the DPA is to create these opportunities abroad.
Up to speed with the interests that are taking place. Is this sessional paper adequate enough and has taken aboard some of the changes that we are noticing as well with the international liberal order is ahead by the recent changes in policy in the United States. It looks like it's not going to be business as usual, and I think maybe we need to start to revisit some of the assumptions that we have made as far as Kenya's position is concerned. I particularly noted that our response to the 10% tariff was very feeble. I think we didn't speak very strongly about it. The statement, I'm referring to the statement that was issued by the Ministry of Trade. We didn't speak like a confident, independent sovereign state. And I think maybe there's a need to articulate more strongly on that issue, and maybe to demands an acute appreciation of what the national interest is, what Kenya is going to do in order to deal with those challenges. Upgrading of our capabilities. I'm grateful also that we've learned that quite a number of international organizations are moving to Nairobi. United Nations agencies are moving to have their operations out of Nairobi. But at the same time, we must be also looking at sufficient support, how particularly resources this is going to be impacted by the shrinking aid basket that the United States has disbanded, which was the major provider of aid. the Europeans are heading that way.
In terms of the process of the transition, I think we've
and to a certain extent, there's been a multilateral multilateral system that we have come to depend may be seriously affected as a result. And one of the drafting of the that have been raised here by the
and like PCS mentioned earlier,
Principal Secretary that we are going to align our foreign policy
submitted to
with our development goals. And the question that I raise is that given that foreign policy is not a transactional,
and as well as final debate,
how would you align foreign policy with our development goals? That's going to be a very big
national policy,
big challenge which needs to be looked at.
I think I alluded to
I could have
what we call
in some other aspects, the peacekeeping element, for example, that you've touched on.
8 of them now.
The fact that,
but like I say,
Ethiopia and Rwanda are heavily involved. But I am also fearful that peacekeeping would also be a
they can stand on their own feet,
in
but
the
they interact
evolving US
in a
foreign
very
policy.
dynamic environment, and that's why
the fact that America is going for protectionism rather than globalization would affect the funding of peacekeeping,
which
and
define our priorities.
Remittances, as far as I concern,
you can see from these
from the donor communities,
new and emerging areas of
finally, I'd like to zero on.
I think we have discussed. For example,
on the
matters
presentation,
environmental and climate
we're consuming huge volume of information,
and
there's some diminishing attention as far as is concerned. I wanted to first of all ask the million that has been presented by our sister.
Discuss Africa's roadmap.
What is leverage for that? Where is that information from? Because
again, these are areas
I don't believe that our diaspora is that big.
Not just
I don't know
of
ordinary
areas of
engagement,
but also the military domain,
statistical information that we can rely on, and therefore we need to be realistic in how we deal with information.
Will discuss
I like the idea that we're looking at the diaspora as a resource.
These new areas, there are
not necessarily for remittance. We don't only need to milk them.
The social, cultural,
you can't just continuously milk the cow. You also need it to nurture and feed it,
optimized
so that it can continue to provide
investment, particularly in areas such as tourism,
out of the diaspora,
and many other areas.
But there is scope looking at our diaspora from this perspective, for example, the Israeli diaspora or the Irish diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, and many others. Maybe a little bit of a struggle for us, given that Ireland and the Jewish community and some other countries, their populations have social, economic, and political base in the countries there. For example, the United States. There are bigger populations like the Chinese diaspora or the Indian diaspora, with a lot of expertise, which do not have that
a reality that might push the world
economic and political weight that
nevertheless
these other countries have.
So
I wanted to say that the labor mobility that we have known is going to be declining because of United States policy of going inward. And the political influence of our diaspora is not going to be that strong, given the fact that the U.S. now is deporting many diaspora people, including people with
the United States
with green cards
at preferential terms.
And then finally, I wanted to say that I noticed that there is a growing duplication
of dynamic
between diaspora and the Ministry of Labour.
But also present opportunities.
This duplication is rather surprising, given the fact that the Labour Ministry is the one with the system, the legal framework on matters relating to the labour market and employment. And I'm wondering why the Ministry of the Department Diaspora is not strengthening its position in other areas and filling the gap, rather than taking some of the work that is traditionally that of the Labour Ministry. then finally, let me express my
in the recent past there's been several
opposition to
on the Sudan
safe houses.
on
I don't think it is a great idea
even
to create an unnecessary layer.
And sometimes you hear
because I wanted to ask directly also,
speaking to
what is the number of
sort of different things, and it creates a bit
whom
of
you have kept in a
those
safe
outside the
house
country who are
in the last
observing us
12 months?
into one
The number must be very small,
have a common position on the matter. And therefore it's our hope that through this process we will have even greater
not take
coherence,
over
and
a much bigger role
I'm happy that
in
our
expanding
colleagues
that
from the Ministry
role
of
by
Defense
keeping them in
also
bed and breakfast places. And I've been in the diaspora, and I think that it is doable in that sense if we
we have been urged, I think, time and time again to maintain our leadership,
the role of the diaspora department. And finally,
and global positioning.
into the legislative
to know the breakdown.
This is something
We have embassies all over the world.
given us respect, because we have been consistent on several critical issues globally, and as a result, we are getting
related to the
we're entering into
because I thought that is all what our embassies do.
players, which then requires that we strengthen our capacity to respond to multilateral.
Want to place officials? Why don't you designate officials who are already there to handle diaspora issues? Because after all, we are a poor country. We're not going to expand our budgets
in terms of the challenges
all the time
that we face,
we
and
need to be
measures,
we need to be smart.
we still
Being
are
smart
dealing
means
with
rather than
delays.
creating new
policy
positions and
adoption.
placing them in
I'll
foreign
give you an
affairs,
example.
we can make use of those who are already there and
So
designate
recently,
them as diaspora officers
Cabinet
can be
adopted the
transferred,
position that
but
from a
duplicating a
budgeting
whole
standpoint,
list of officials that would be
the
posted,
Ministry of Foreign
like
Affairs should be moved
labor
from
attaches,
the
trade
pair sector.
attaches, and those are specialized areas, and we cannot cover every country where we have trade.
Like I mentioned, we have
Those are
a
the main
virtual
issues
audience
that I like to
for
share
ambassadors
towards this
different
discussion.
regions. I want to urge them to observe protocol when it comes to the use of technology. But I was
augmented accountability and transparency. In
to
conclusion,
move
I
the
wish to
Ministry of Foreign
commend the
Affairs
Ministry of Foreign
to
Affairs
the security sector.
for
We have
subjecting this
experienced
policy to
quite some
parliamentary
resistance
consideration, as it is envisaged.
from some of our
Use
bigger
from the
brothers.
House will enrich
Thank you
the
very much,
make it
Honorable Yusuf.
the enactment
Such
And that
the
resistance
difficult questions.
means that
Number one is national paper up to speed, given the challenge.
on our parts has been undermined. And it means
Number
that
one
the
is to
programs that we
say
put in
that
place to
the foreign
address our
policy and
constraints
sessional
and to
paper
strengthen our diplomatic
already
engagement
anticipated
will
and
not
took
be
into
realized.
account
And again,
the ruptured multilateral order.
Parliament through
It appreciated the chaotic lack of cooperation in the multilateral arena that was already impacting, the way in which we address issues.
We are doing everything, ladies and gentlemen.
It appreciated further an emerging multipolarity, noting that
forward with regard
US
to
hegemony, as it were, and the hegemony of the global north was in recession. It therefore called upon the country to adopt a much more pragmatic posture, a diplomacy,
particularly when it comes to the discussion of the session on the floor of Parliament.
an alignment engagement,
and
a diplomacy
campaign
that would
on
build
policy advocacy and awareness creation
partnerships
at
across different parts of the
we will
world.
see the results
So
of this,
it already envisioned,
into
to some
the future.
extent,
And most
the
importantly, we're not
disruptions
just
that we are witnesses
and
to.
relying on the resources that you have earmarked for us. We are also trying to build partnership, and I'm really grateful, for example, that the government has been standing with us in this regard.
Disruption caused
We are
by
forging partnerships
the Trump
with institutions such
presidency.
as JICA, with institutions see that, including China,
Kind of
not just
decisions
relying
have
and
been
putting
taken
our
will be
eggs,
taken to the extent they have been. We don't even know what is coming. around the bend,
their own transition.
and therefore, I think there is a sense in which we need to build additional language, just a bit of contextual language, in the policy and maybe in the sessional paper. But I think in terms of
to conclude, ladies and gentlemen,
to these challenges, I think we had built sufficient appreciation of
foreign policy is being
the uncertainties in the global arena, the uncertainty.
I think very few countries have gone this far.
Context sufficient for us to be able to move forward.
To own our foreign policy priorities and develop
of aligning foreign policy with development goals,
administration, so that it will not matter that there will be a new administration.
Is that we are
not matter who that will be,
our foreign policy.
We will have a joint purpose, a common and a shared understanding of
and supporting our development objectives.
And
so, for example, we did mention that
we will sustain a commitment
our strategic partnerships with different countries is something that is being prioritized. We are building a robust relationship with Middle Eastern countries for the purpose of mobilizing capital. We are working with Europe in terms of access to their markets, attracting FDI,
you have internalized,
showcasing specific investment opportunities for our country. So I would argue that there is a sense in which we can say that there is a measure of alignment between our foreign policy in service of or in
so that we can have a joint session
of Q&A development.
Thank you very, very much. Let's put our hands together for us.
On the matter of peacekeeping, appreciating your view that that there is an erosion of support for peacekeeping. We of course are cognizant that the UN recently, particularly the UN Security Council, adopted Resolution 2719, which permits support by the UN through its regular contribution to AU-led peacekeeping missions. Might be peacekeeping missions that are sanctioned by the African Union, for example, that could receive direct contributory support from the UN on the UN regular budget, not on voluntary funding, from different member states, which means that there is still a measure of stability and certainty kind of resource envelope that the UN has, that we can be able to tap into for the purpose of peacekeeping, which means that the call by the Cabinet Secretary for us to prioritize
on diaspora diplomacy
peacekeeping
and the diaspora broadly
as an arena where the country can play an important role, I think is valid. I will leave the rest of the questions to my sister Rosalie, even though I will come back to the very last question of the role of embassies in taking care of diaspora. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll start.
Thank you, PS.
So what I'm hoping to do is
let me try and go through questions one by one. The first one I think is a numbers question. Where do we get this 4 million
these discussions in the sessional paper?
There isn't a country in the world that is able to give you definitively the number of their diaspora.
We do have
so you go about it using various data sources, you triangulate, you do a little bit of what do you call it, when you plan how populations grow and come up with a number. So the way we've come up with the
I don't know who needs to mute or
million number has to do with data that we have from the IOM, data that we have from census that was taken by the Kenyan government, the data that we have from various embassies, the data that foreign governments in terms of numbers of Kenyans in those spaces, some triangulation and projections, and we come to that 4 million number.
So
it's important to note
that we do have a diaspora policy,
diasporas around the world, not just the Kenyan diaspora, but all diaspora. Our members, they're not just mine, but the experience of people who have
in-depth, not just into diaspora diplomacy, but our
tend not to register themselves
broadly. And I want to thank the Vice Chair
how many diaspora they have by just seeing how many passport applications they have in a country.
I believe it was a month ago. Okay. The slide, the first slide number 2. Number we keep in pace. Slide number 2 is familiar probably to all of us. Certainly for Bunge, I think every time I have come to ask for money, I have shown you this very colorful slide. I think we are all familiar with I hope we're all familiar with what the mandate of the State Department is, but importantly what our approach to delivering that mandate is, where we begin from the ground up, we protect diasporians, we engage, we empower them, and lead to prosperity not just of our diaspora, but of this nation. So, picking up from where I left off earlier when I spoke during my opening remarks, some questions. What does it mean to have Kenyans in high-ranking positions in foreign governments? What would